there, we now have, thanks, Francis. From there, we now have a wider array of descriptors to illustrate our community. So you may have heard terms like AANHPI, APITA, APA. We wanted to ground this workshop by saying we want to honor the spirit of all of these terms, and we'll be using Asian American, but do not want that to be a limiter because our community isn't a monolith. So other pop quiz, do you know how many people of Asian descent live in the United States? There's a clue on the screen, which is it's actually 24 million. Yeah, Lisa's like, yes, saw it, but I didn't want to reveal it. So next time you go into Jeopardy night, you will know that there's actually 24 million people of Asian descent, roughly 9 to 10% of the US population. And in terms of sub-communities, we've broken them on the pie chart on the left for East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and also in the spirit of inclusivity, we've also included West Asia, which in the footnote, you can see the countries there, a lot of what's more seen as Middle Eastern countries, as well as Central Asia, so countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. One of the main takeaways here, though, is on the right, the top 6 countries of origin represent about 80% of the population. So what that means is immigrants from China, India, Philippines, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan represent about 80% of people of Asian descent in the US. So I think that context allows us to understand why, when we think of Asian representation or Asian narratives, Asian storytelling, Asian empowerment, why is it that certain countries might come up more often, even though we have such a colorful diaspora within our communities as well? And then, yeah, any questions here before we move on? One thing I'll note is the Pew Research Center did a report last year, and they analyzed that 60% of Asian people in the US are first-generation immigrants, meaning that you were born in another country, and 30% of Asians are children of immigrants. So the idea of like intergenerational history, intergenerational trauma, multi-generational households is often a very common uniting factor within Asian families, just because 90% of our population are either first-generation immigrants themselves or children of immigrants. Cool. So we wanted to just briefly touch upon some of the events that have shaped how Asians are viewed in the US and how that contributes to our sense of mental health. So some people don't actually know this, but there was actually 2 Filipino soldiers in the Civil War. One of them is pictured in the upper left-hand corner here. Corporal Felix Baldery was actually a Filipino soldier in the Union. And so, believe it or not, Asians have been here since the 1800s, and a lot of that came towards the end of the 1800s with the gold rush and our ancestors building, key parts of US infrastructure through railroads and roads and bridges and dams. A lot of that in the 1900s was driven by events happening in Asia, which contributed to a mass outflow of refugees. So in the 1900s, things like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cambodian genocide, the partition of India in 1949, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, all were factors which led to immigrants from Asia coming to the US. And that has contributed in some ways to our broader conversations around the model minority myth, as well as the forever foreigner. So just wanted to put that into context of some of the individual experiences we might receive as Asian identifying individuals are also couched in this historical context. So now diving deeper into what are the specific cultural factors that we see at Anise Health serving Asian clients by providing them therapy and coaching. We've highlighted a few here. So family expectations is often a big thing that we notice between people's sense of self being very tied to their parents' sense of self, either wanting to bring honor to the family, wanting to save face, feeling tension between what parents want for their kids and what kids want for themselves, or making choices that are different from what their parents or family members or caregivers would have thought was in their best interest, then having to either set boundaries or learn how to handle self-advocacy. So that is oftentimes a very common through line that we see with our clients. And it's not just, it's in like every stage of life. It's in high school applying to college. I just did an event with USF yesterday, and even college kids choosing majors or future careers. It's in jobs, choosing maybe jobs that are more passionate or more fulfilling rather than the quote unquote stable jobs. And it's even, we have a lot of moms and parents, things around interracial relationships, choosing different partners, choosing to have kids or not having kids. Actually, around 70 to 80% of our clients at Anise are Asian women, which both highlights kind of the extra intersectionality between being your gender and your race, but also shows that there's a lot of stigma against men from using, Asian men in particular, from using mental health services. So all this comes together to show how family expectations is often some of the things that heightens one's mental health in the Asian community. The second cultural factor we see is this term called acculturative stress. Have y'all heard of this before? It's often used with the term bicultural tension too. Yes, no, maybe. Yes, okay, cool, maybe. We see acculturative stress as the additional cognitive and mental load that comes with belonging to multiple cultures and not wanting to fail or defy the expectations of either, or stated otherwise, wanting to uplift all of the norms of belonging to multiple cultures. The tension that comes is sometimes cultures clash. And there's famous examples of, you go to corporate workplace and you get feedback in your performance review that you need to speak up more, you need to be more bold. And then you go home to your family during the holidays and you get feedback that you're a loudmouth and you're not deferential enough and you have too many big opinions, right? So that extra energy in deciding what version of you shows up in the spaces that you belong to is termed as acculturative stress. And we have incorporated that into our model, into our intake forms, by asking certain questions that allow us to better understand what is the level of a cultural stress that our clients feel. And I can explain that a little bit more, but just acknowledging that we have a superpower being Asian American and having that cultural fluidity, but also there is some energy expenditure required to take that. Perfectionism is also something that's very common. So sometimes a value that was more prevalent in our ancestors, be it our grandparents or our parents, was things like stability, affluence, charity through things like being able to give back financially, and also this idea of straight line assimilation theory, which is that every generation needs to be better than the next generation. However, a coping mechanism that comes from those habits is a form of minority perfectionism, which sometimes is like overworking, overstudying, over preparing, being less willing to take risks because you don't want to fail, focusing more on outcomes rather than learning and experiential processes. And all of these can contribute to a sense of perfectionism that's maladaptive. So we have some researchers on our team that have looked at the difference between adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism. And I've noticed among our Asian clients, there's a higher rate of maladaptive perfectionism. The difference is that adaptive perfectionism is like the striving for excellence without blaming or criticizing yourself when you aren't excellent. And maladaptive becomes the striving for excellence, but only focusing on that 5% that you didn't hit and critiquing yourself and internalizing that as low self-worth. So we have techniques at Anise that we try to do to address that side of the house. Intergenerational trauma, I've mentioned before, just we live in multi-generational households and sometimes those considerations impact us. And then shame, guilt, and pride are also things that we see as well. So I'll just pause here if there's any questions or reflections on this. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks so
Lisa.
much for sharing. Oh, yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing about the perfectionism piece. I'm curious, what types of methodologies do your providers use when combating maladaptive perfectionism?
Love that. So we see some therapeutic modalities work really well, which is DBT or ACT, dialectic behavioral therapy, and acceptance and commitment. I think it's acceptance and commitment therapy. Um, We also have some therapists that do art therapy and play therapy. And so that provides like a safe space for people to just have a little bit more fun. So we've seen that work. And then we do a few workshops specifically about perfectionism where we have people take a test and it scores their level of perfectionism. And then based off of like what quartile they're in, we have specific tools that people can use to respond to that. Thank you. Okay, so now we want to talk a little bit about how does mental health care right now arise or not arise to the occasion of meeting some of these cultural stressors. And so some of these stats for you to know, if you have ever tried to seek care and felt it to be unbelievably hard, you're not alone and there's literally reasons for this. So one in the upper left corner is that, did you know in the past 30 years within the National Institute of Health, less than 0.17% of all funding has funded research focused on Asian health specifically. And so not even 1% of all the research projects by the NIH have been focused specifically on Asian patients. So that's just like one area that's just like a lack of inclusivity from Asian participants and focus on Asian community. And we have citations at the bottom too if you wanted to look at any of the articles. In the upper right-hand corner, less than 5% of all psychologists identify as Asian. And as we mentioned before, about 9 to 10% of the American population identifies as Asian. So we're underrepresented in terms of psychology. That said, a lot of other master's level therapists are more on par. So things like LMFTs, LCSWs, LPCs, those tend to be more represented. But just in terms of psychologists, we're underrepresented. Thirdly, in the bottom left-hand corner, people of color in general are 50% more likely to drop out of therapy after the first session. This is especially true in the Asian community, and it's often because of low provider trust, chemistry, and compatibility. So if you've ever gone to a session or two of therapy and you're like, why was this more tiring for me to have to explain myself to my therapist? Or like, why am I doing so much extra work to have to justify my actions? That is often one of the reasons why people drop out of care. Also, just the way that therapy is or isn't reimbursed makes it a lot harder for people to find someone that matches or fits their needs. So that's one of the things that we try to do at Anise is we get you to a provider that's suited for you faster so that you can stay in care and get the support you need longer. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, affordability and access. I once heard someone in the Bay Area get charged $400 an hour for therapy. That blew my mind. And often it's because just therapy is really expensive. Providers go through all that training and then healthcare doesn't insure them well. It takes so much paperwork for them to submit claims that a lot of the therapists will be like, I'll just do private practice and charge self-pay. But then they'll charge $200 an hour, which I don't have the money to pay $200 an hour for therapy, you know? So as a result, 1 in 3 Asian Americans who are diagnosed with depression don't actually get any care because it's too expensive. So those are some of the barriers on the supply side, but there's also barriers on the demand side in terms of Asian people asking for help. So this stacked bar chart, all this shows is in the last year, who used mental health services as reported by SAMHSA. So the y-axis is the percentage of mental health service utilization split by gender and race. And so the takeaway here is Asians are 3 to 4 times less likely to have sought out mental health care. And in particular, Asian men are the least likely of all races and genders to have used mental health services in the past year. So one thing that we often see is like dynamics with dads, Asian dads in particular, things around like emotional suppression, anger, guilt, like lack of communication, or with brothers or with uncles or grandparents. So oftentimes because of some of the stigma in using care, that gets transferred into our relations as well. Okay. And all of this contributes to what we believe is like a kind of brewing Asian mental health crisis that we're so grateful for many of our partners to be working together, like Yellow Chair Collective, Asian Mental Health Project, Asian Mental Health Collective. We're all working to try to address some of these numbers. The stats that I'll call out in the bottom right, which in recent terms is a little bit more debated, but historically, the Office of Minority Health has reported that suicide is the leading cause of death for Asian Americans between the ages of 15 and 24. We are the only racial minority where suicide is the leading cause of death. So we really want to help make access to care more accessible before a crisis strikes. Okay, I'm gonna pause since I know that was a lot of information. So I'm gonna try this tool, which is this annotation tool. And I'm wondering if everyone, are you able to annotate the screen? Okay, cool. So I'm hoping this is like a way that we can be more interactive. So on this spectrum, how comfortable do you feel speaking about mental health with your family? You just like draw a circle or a star or a little smiley face or okay. So looks like anywhere between like, God, don't make me do that. I don't, that's very uncomfortable to like, yes, I feel very comfortable. Okay, awesome. I would just love to hear from people. If you feel comfortable sharing why, like why are some people really comfortable talking about mental health and why are some other people not comfortable? So, um, let's see. Samantha, can I invite you in if you feel comfortable sharing? I think you said comfortable. Why do you feel comfortable talking about mental health with your family?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. I think I accidentally spammed this whole
No
thing
worries. I love the
with
stars.
annotation. Okay. Um, so I think I am very grateful and fortunate to have a family who is supportive through, I guess, my mental health struggles. And I think part of it might be because my parents aren't as like traditionally, I don't know how to put this in a good way. They're not, they're a little more Americanized. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is the right word that I'm looking for. Um, but their parenting style, I never felt pressured to be like a straight A student or always be excelling in everything I did. They and they've always told me before and they tell me now they just want me to be happy. And I think that really helps me feel comfortable talking about these kinds of things.
Really powerful. That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a more gentle or flexible parenting style. And a result of that is you actually feel comfortable talking about your mental health with your parents, which is awesome. Thanks, Samantha. I know I put you on the spot there, so thank you for potentially stepping out of your comfort zone. Um, I'm wondering on the other side of the spectrum, I think I saw Caitlin or other people there. Would you feel comfortable sharing why you put yourself on that spectrum? And no worries if not, if you don't want to.
So I drew a circle that is to the far left of very uncomfortable, meaning I probably wouldn't ever do it. Um, I appreciated a few slides back how you were pointing out how Filipinos were in several different wars. So like I come from like an army family or like a just a military family in general. So I think just generations of being from a Filipino American family in that context definitely has a bootstraps type of connotation. So, like, oh, we have gone through so much worse, or invalidating a lot of my struggles in that way, because I guess in comparison to like what my ancestors had to do, I'm very spoiled not doing anything and I like stay home very often. So, like what do I have to worry about? So I feel like in a cultural context of being Filipino American from that lineage, it's like very impossible to talk about mental health. Um, but I think like maybe a solution that I've found is at least educating myself on like building my vocabulary to understand what's going on mentally, seeking out help, and also creating like a chosen family. Like Francis here on chat, like I can talk to like other people about what's going on. So I felt like as I got older, I can compensate in other ways. Yeah.
That really resonates with me. This like constant comparison of, oh, well, your grandparents had it worse, so what do you have even to complain about? And it just like dismisses, it basically like doesn't give us a right to be upset about anything. So, and I find it inspirational that you found other avenues of seeking validation that doesn't have to be your family or your parents. Actually, maybe we can go through, there's only two more of this, so it's like very fast. Let me just clear all drawings. The reason why we focus on parents specifically is we do find that like choosing to or not to get close to your parents very common in people who come to Anise as well, especially younger people who either live close to their families or share the same house. So that's the context for between these two other questions. So we'll do it one more time, which is how well do you feel like you understand your parents? Out there. Okay, so I will call in Lisa. You wanted to share why you put yourself there.
I think so. I'm 28, so I think I'm a little bit older in my life, and as I've reached my mid to late 20s, I've been more and more interested in learning about my parents' backgrounds. So if you were to ask me this question when I was like 21, I think the answer would be probably like way further left. But lately, I've been trying to dive into more um, having more open conversations with my parents because not only is it a chance for me to get to know them in the limited time that they have left, it's also a chance for me to contextualize my own struggles, my own mental health concerns. Because I'm like, oh, you know what? That totally makes sense why my parents parented me this way because they went through that. Not saying that it was okay, but it just contextualizes the situation a little bit more for me. And it allows me to, I think it's really allowed me to accept and maybe forgive some of the struggles that I've gone through when I was a kid, because I learned more about what my parents went through.
I hear that. I think sometimes when we are able to ground ourselves, we then have a little bit more energy to be compassionate versus like when we just really want to be seen and heard by our parents, it doesn't feel like we can kind of parent our parents that way. And then I saw maybe Kiana um, put it somewhere in the middle. If you felt comfortable sharing, would you like to let us know why you put your dot there?
Yeah, sure. So, um, my mom, our relationship was really up and down up until recently. Um, we butted heads when I was young. I actually was sent to boarding school at 14. And my dad, but now, like, I feel like in the past just month or two, like I'm 31 and I've gotten to the point where I'm like, we can't keep fighting. My mom was diagnosed bipolar and it's made it difficult, but I was like, I'm trying to make it better with her. And I feel like sometimes I understand her, sometimes I don't at all. And then my dad, I haven't seen him since I was 12 years old. So I don't know. I don't understand that at all. And I never really had the guts to ask my mom, like, what happened between them because I felt like I was going to get a really biased answer with her. Like I was just going to get her side. So, but recently we have been talking about it, and I finally found the courage to ask her because I never really liked having uncomfortable conversations, and I didn't want my mom to feel like I like, oh, why are you trying to go have a relationship with your dad? Like it just felt awkward. But now it's like I'm finding the courage to ask those questions. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I understand my mom, sometimes I don't at all. It's definitely a roller coaster. So, yeah.
That strength is incredible. You sound like you put in a lot of work there, so that's awesome. And thank you for letting us know. It helps me feel closer. So thank you for that. Relatedly, so the last question is the inverse, which was, how well do you think your parents understand you? And I think a lot of us felt like we were in this upper half before. So I'm just curious the other way around. How well do you think your parents understand you? So I'll just invite maybe the last two people if y'all felt comfortable sharing. So either Kimberly or Z, if you felt comfortable sharing, maybe Kimberly, where did you put yourself on the spectrum and why?
Yeah, I would kind of put myself um kind of in the middle. Um and I think it's like they know me pretty well. I mean, they've seen me grow up. But I think kind of as I got older in the past like 10 years from high school up until now, I've definitely grown as a person and I definitely have different viewpoints on certain things. So I think that's why I kind of put myself in the middle because I also don't necessarily express my viewpoints to them all the time, or sometimes I think I just might be like burdening them with my thoughts. So I just don't say anything. But they know me pretty well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A part of it is like you didn't share or didn't want to share, and part of it is like maybe they didn't ask. So they know versions of you, but not all of the latest versions, which is really interesting. I think that could be similar because I see the spread of responses a lot wider. Like more of us were clustered in this upper right field, and now the answers are more spread. So just curious if Kay, you wanted to share. It looks like you put yourself in the middle as well.
Oh yeah, hi. I think I feel the same as Kimberly said, because my mom and dad they was divorced, so I was grow up with my mom, and so she knows me very well. But since I'm 23 now, I already grew up, so I just want to show her all the good side of me. I don't want to show, even though she knows some of trauma I have, but uh, since I think I need to be um mature enough, so I don't want her to know if I have some like bad side or some um trouble, some um, yeah, problem if I have. I don't want to let her down. And for my dad, I don't know. I don't think he know me at all. So I put myself in the middle.
Thanks so much, Kay. Yeah, it's really nice to hear that. It sounds like you put a lot of thought into it too. Just want to say thanks, everyone. Part of being in community with each other is learning from each other. So I know that might have felt uncomfortable, but I'm really proud of us for just sharing and opening ourselves up a little bit to each other in this community as well. And so some reflection questions we would have as a result is, what are the types of support that you use when you're feeling stressed or unwell, if it is your family or not your family? And then have you tried therapy or coaching before? So in the last few minutes, we're going to move a little bit towards culturally responsive care. I know Samantha had asked at the top of the hour, like, what are things that we can do to take care of ourselves? And one of those avenues is culturally responsive care. So what is it? It's a type of mental health care that intentionally acknowledges, welcomes, and addresses social and cultural factors that impact a person's well-being. So stated in spoken word, it's more like acknowledging that one's racial and cultural context does impact our lived experience, whether we want to or not, and just showing just looking a certain way will impact how we are treated, but also the areas of support that are available to us. And so what happens when care is not culturally informed is that in some cases, AA and HPI clients can be over-medicated by prescribing medications that exacerbate psychological distress, or under-medicated based off of misdiagnosis. And then also things like increased mistrust. So there's a lot of misinformation around, well, you can't spill the family secrets to a therapist because it will bring shame or dishonor upon the family. Or we hear a lot in college students that if you're trying to vie for certain fields, if you go to the counseling center, it will somehow be shown on your record or will hurt admissions to future programs. So, and not acknowledging this means that people will not have access to care as much. And so we're just one of the options. We have a lot of self-service tools. We have a bunch of different workshops. I wish we had more time to go into like some of our stress management workshops or executive presence workshops, or we have a variety of just like self-help workshops. But the short version of why we exist is we want to be a platform where people can access culturally responsive care easily and affordably. So some of the ways that we do that is we have an intake form on our website, which takes less than 10 minutes to complete, and you'll be matched to therapists within 2 business days. So a lot of the reason why finding a therapist is so hard is you often have to like message all these people and they might not get back to you, or when they get back to you, you're on the waiting list or it's too expensive. We basically, through the screening form, will match you to one of our clinicians within 2 days. You can schedule a free trial call, and then you can book care as soon as a week afterwards. We also combine therapy and coaching in a monthly platform, which I'll share in a bit, but all of this drives to better results. So in particular, 92% of our clients improve their symptoms of stress, anxiety, and depression after just 12 weeks, which is 3 months. And we work with awesome providers. We don't just rely on ethnographic matching, which is assuming that if you're an Asian person, matching you to an Asian provider will be better. In fact, a lot of that is compounding variables around empathy and the ability to relate to the client. But more important than one's shared history is the curriculum and education systems by which they were trained. And so what we do is we hire and source clinicians who have worked extensively with Asian patients, who have had training in culturally responsive care, and we onboard them through our own proprietary curriculum where we retrain and reskill clinicians as well. And so our clinicians are PhDs, PsyDs, LMFTs, LCSWs, and we have a variety of coaches, from health and wellness coaches to coaches around fitness and nutrition and financial planning. So we will give you the pairing of therapy and coaching best suited for your needs at that stage of life. And we combine therapy and coaching. So we're the only platform that we know of that gives you access to a dedicated care team of both a therapist and a coach. So this bar just shows you the typical journey. So on the left-hand side, once you complete the intake form, based off your values and your needs, we'll match you to a provider and you'll have a free trial call. Then your first month is 3 weeks of therapy and 1 week of coaching. And the reason why it's slightly more therapy is because the therapist develops the personalized treatment plan and then works with the coach to make it action-oriented and solutions-based. And then the second month onwards is alternating coaching and therapy appointments. So we just wanted to share this because even if you are personally now working with your own therapist or coach, something that could be helpful for you is finding either an extra therapist or an extra coach and then working with them on different things. So I work with my coach on like, hey, I need to move next month and it's very stressful. Can we literally pull out a planner and then write down all the things? Because I get overwhelmed if I try to do it myself. So like very action oriented, very tactical, tends to be a little bit more like short term. And then I work with my therapist on broader things like, oh, my relationship with my brother has been really hard, or my grandma's 92 now in China, and I have a lot of guilt around like not visiting her. So some of the more like classic, like psychoeducational work with your therapist. And oh, this note on the bottom is we do accept insurance. So in California, we accept Aetna, Anthem, United, Blue Shield, Magellan, and we're currently negotiating with a few more. So that will help keep copays low. Otherwise, our self-pay starts at $60 a week for 4 weekly sessions of therapy and coaching. And we have a scholarship program where we give away care to 30 individuals every year. This is just sharing some of the AI tools that we have for our providers. I feel like in 2024, you can't get away from a conversation without AI somehow getting slipped in. So this is our way of sharing that we do have AI-driven tools to help our providers better understand what's happening with our clients. And so if you are interested, we can share more about that later. Our intake form. And yeah, I'll just pause. The last two slides that I had was just like us sharing a note of gratitude from Anise. We are an all Asian, mostly female, all minority team. And just personally, I've had a few like ups and downs trying to make this like capitalist VC model work in providing affordable, accessible healthcare. Quite honestly, like a lot of investors that we speak to aren't really Asian. And so we got a lot of questions like, why do Asians need specialized healthcare? Like, more Asians are being shown in movies. There's a lot of Asian tech CEOs. Like, you guys seem to be doing pretty well. You know, why do I need to pay or invest in a specialized service? And it does take a lot of effort on our team to like not internalize that as we aren't deserving of specialized care, especially when we speak so strongly to some of the mental health statistics and be like, our people are really hurting. And just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean there's like an internal suffering that's happening. So I think spaces like this, where I can hear other Asian people be like, yeah, this is a part of my life and I found ways to manage it, is just very reassuring for me to hear that this need is important. And so we've been to so many pitch competitions and accelerators where we try to advocate for Asian mental health among all these other like dog walking or food delivery or like SaaS companies who are trying to get VC funding as well. So that's just been our approach of trying to use business and startups to provide services that are both for profit but also equitable. And we are very humbled with like the people that we've gotten to meet. So we do, in addition to individual services, our clinicians go in person to lead workshops on a variety of different topics, from like so literally so many different topics. And so I think as a team of entrepreneurs, it's been really humbling to see our community grow and talk about this more and see spaces like this where people talk about this more. So just wanted to say thank you, and I'll just leave it here. If y'all wanted to schedule a consultation with our care coordinator, the QR code's in the upper left-hand corner. If you want to submit the intake form yourself, you can scan the QR code in the right. Actually, sorry, I'll send this deck to Francis afterwards and he can circulate it. But if y'all have feedback for us, if you fill out this form, we'll send you a workshop about burnout and boundaries that we have recorded. This is like a 2-minute Google survey form. So if y'all just want to give us feedback, that'd be awesome. And then we have Insta, you can follow us email us here if you have any questions. So yeah, I'll just pause and see if anyone had any last minute questions in the 2 minutes that we have together.
I just want to thank you. This is a great presentation, and I loved hearing about your model and all the work that you and your organization have put together for our community. So thank you for this work.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm noticing like the little perfectionism part of me was like, to Samantha's points about like self-care resources, we didn't really get to go deeper there. So I'm just going to put a link to our blog where we publish a lot of like self-help resources for free. So things like a worksheet for intersectional identities, like caregiver tips if y'all ever want to have kids one day. So I will just drop that here. Thanks, Lisa. See you. So yeah, we just published a blog about like masculinity for Asian men. And so there's a lot of self-help resources there that we didn't get a chance to go into today. But other than that, just wanted to say thank you, Francis, for bringing us together. And I'll put my email here if you all want to reach out to me for anything.
I had a question.
Yeah.
You said you had like the perfectionism test. Do you have a link to that?
Yeah, hold on. Let me share that. The only thing is the workshop that we do like talks through the scores. So the test itself doesn't tell you like, oh, because you got this score, you are this person. So we do that in the workshop, but let me at least give you the link so you can take it yourself. Okay, here is the link to the perfectionism test. The short version, Kiana, is if you score above a 44 in either standards or discrepancy, then you are a maladaptive perfectionist. So anything over 44 equals maladaptive perfectionism. Obviously, it's a gradient. The scale goes up to like 70 something, and then our clinician would have talked through it, but that's the very fast version of that test.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, thanks everyone. We're at the hour, so really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you all.